So I'm Phil Holden, I'm the Deputy Party Leader, and today I'm going to speak to you about visibility. Recently, my wife and my daughter wore me down, and so we ended up buying a puppy. And so this means I've got to go out and walk my dog a couple of times a day. And I was really encouraged by Hamish and the campaign that he waged down in the borders. He waged such a positive campaign. I'd been a little bit shy about being part of the family party with everyone that I knew, but his attitude was just like, the family party is the most dignified party that you could be a part of, and I am just unashamed to be a part of that party. So I bought myself this family party top, and so now when I walk my dog and parents come up and say, "Oh, can my child stroke your dog?" I'm wearing this. It's just in my rotation of tops that I wear. So when I pick up my child from school, kind of 1 in 3 times, I'll probably have this on. When I'm in church, I'll often have this on as well. And so people will see that, and they'll pick it up in this part of the election cycle. And this kind of advertising is so important. As Michael mentioned, we saw our share of the vote double between the Holyrood and the council elections. That's really amazing, because only a third of our candidates were actually handing out leaflets in the council election. A lot of that extra kind of doubling of our vote is just because people become more familiar with the family party. They think, we've seen it once, we've seen it twice, they're not going away. I've heard a bit about their views, I've heard them speak a few times, I'm now willing to vote for them. Recently I was shopping for a birthday, and I was charged with buying drinks, and I was in Aldi, and I could see the Aldi Coca-Cola. The Aldi Cola was 60p, and the Coca-Cola was £2.60. And it's sort of like, well, I don't really want to offend the person that's inviting me, so I buy the Coca-Cola. And that tells you something of the value of advertising. And so in the Holyrood election, this was our flyer. And it cost us about £26,000 to get this out, A5 flyer. We printed enough to get to every household. But one of the sad things about having such a small flyer was that we could only put our policies in there very briefly. And this obviously led to a fair amount of challenge on the doorsteps. So we had statements like, we protect children from vulgar, corrupting sex education. We oppose transgender ideology. Now, some people will see that and they'll understand exactly what we mean. But other people will see that and they'll say, oh, the family party is against all sex education, and they think that it's vulgar and corrupting, which is not our position. Or that the Scottish Family Party hates trans people, which is not our position. So the other day, the Lib Dems put this through my letterbox. It's an A3 folded flyer. Can you imagine if we had this kind of space to explain what our position was on different issues? If we were able to explain why we think that the sex education is corrupting and damaging, which is happening in schools. As I was dropping my daughter off for school one day, I bumped into somebody. He said, "Oh, you're part of the family party, aren't you?" It turned out to be John Christie at the back. And he said he'd heard of the family party, he'd become a part of it, and he's not from any kind of religious background, because I started asking, how come you're a part of the family party? And he said, I just agreed with the values that you have as a party. I love what you were saying. I said, well, what do you think of our pro-life position? Because normally that goes with kind of some sort of religious background. He said, well, to be honest, the first time I saw that, I found it really off-putting. And he said, but then I listened to Mari speaking, and he said within 15 minutes, she had completely won me over. Within 15 minutes of hearing the positive case against abortion on demand, he was won over. So imagine if in our literature, we're not just saying this is what we are standing for, we actually have the opportunity to explain our arguments behind that. Now, to put out a leaflet like that across the nation, it would cost us about £114,000. And most political groups, which are our rivals, they'll put out about 3 of those kind of A3 folded flyers in an election period. And so we really need to be growing the family party membership in this time so that we can be able to distribute these kinds of volumes of flyers. Now, Michael talked about the LGBT movement, and if you're, in a workplace, a school, or almost any organization, you have the kind of diversity and inclusive training and all these kind of things. You'll find the LGBT flags put down in your office. I have no objection to somebody putting something on their own desk, but often that happens in the team area, and I'm thinking, for me personally, I'm a Christian, and so pride is something that I don't value. All aside from the whole LGBT issue, the Bible sees pride as something negative. It would say that pride comes before destruction. Pride is being right in one's own eyes. And I was thinking, well, what could I do that was different to this? And I was thinking, well, I stand for pro-life. Why couldn't I put a pro-life flag on my desk? What would happen if I did that? And in my imagination, somebody would say, some people will find that offensive, that you putting that pro-life flag there. And then I could say, well, I find pride offensive. That's part of my protected characteristics as a Christian. So I had this kind of idea in my head, and I decided to Google and see if anyone has a kind of pro-life flag. And I found that there was a group that ran a design competition to kind of create a pro-life flag. This is what they kind of came up with. And so I had a Google round to see if I could find some people to create these flags. I was able to do that, and you can pick some up today if you'd like to. I think we have about 50 of these flags here. You might want them in the branch, or if there's a way that you can use them individually, feel free to pick one up. And so we've used them for protests down by the Parliament. They can be used for counter-protests and things like that. When they arrived in my house, my daughter was like, oh, I want to take this to school for a show and tell. I thought, I'm not sure if that's right, but, yeah, I should have let her do that. When we were down by the Parliament, a photographer was taking photos of us with these flags. And I said, good luck in trying to sell those photos to newspapers. And he said, I don't think I'm going to be able to do that because the newspapers, they won't take photos on this issue. He said, because the newspapers have received so much funding for public health advertising to do with COVID, it's actually changed their editorial policies. And so they now won't accept stories that go against the government's narratives. So Richard was keen to get some family party flags. So on our live stream, we have that image of the flags. And these ones have just arrived a while ago. We've got over 200 of these. We'd be really keen for people to especially pick these up in branches. You'll have a branch meeting later on today where you talk about the campaigns you'll be running within your branch. I think it's quite good to keep these in general in the branch because you can get some poles, you can wrap them up in a batch of about 10 flags, and then when you go out to a protest, you can just pull them all out. If you have to gather everyone together, it's a bit harder. But if you have a way that you can use them personally, if you want to hang one in your window, somebody said, I want to hang one in my garden permanently. Or if you want to do a table, like a leaflet table outside a school or in a public place outside Tesco, then please grab one for yourself personally. I've paid for these flags. They're free for you to take, but I might not fund the next batch. And so if you'd like to give in to buying the next batch, then you can speak to Zoe, and she'd be willing to take donations on her card machine or take a note of it on the table. They cost just over £2 each to buy, but we'd love it if we could, and we can only order them in batches of 300. So we have to get a fair amount up front to order the next batch. If you'd be willing to donate into that, please do that. We've been trying to be creative. So we went through a rut in our YouTube videos where we're repeating the same content because we stand on the same issues. And often our videos were only getting about 200 or 300 views. So I was speaking to Richard and saying, like, we need to do something more dramatic. And we had this idea of putting the Scottish sex education materials on the outside of the Parliament building. And so we did this video where we did this. And we got 32,000 views on YouTube through doing this and 500 comments. And I looked at the number of comments we had, and I was kind of dreading it. I'm thinking 500 comments, this is just going to be a wall of insults coming towards us. But actually, I couldn't really find a single comment that was not in sympathy with the position that we were taking. There was maybe one or two that were mildly nuanced against what we were doing, but just comment after comment saying how disgusting this is. This is one comment: I fall into the LGBT category and could be described as sex positive. Nevertheless, I find it abhorrent that children are being taught this in school. Another person wrote, I think children should be educated on sex and relationships, but this is basically grooming and sexualizing our kids. There was another person who wrote, I joined the family party straight away when I saw this video. And we've got things like, through this sex education, there are children. So in an Edinburgh school, one girl was sexually assaulted straight after one of these sex education lessons. These flags can be used in other protests, like you might come along to a protest that somebody else is running. I went to a pro-freedom demonstration earlier in the year. If I had the flags, I would have taken a few out then. Scottish Cabby does some sex education protests and things. He'd probably welcome these kind of flags there. I'd say don't take over somebody else's protest. Make sure you're in sympathy with what they're doing, and make sure that the values of another protest are in sympathy with us as a party. And I think one of the biggest opportunities we're going to see to stand up is the conversion therapy laws which are being tried to be brought forward. So we've just seen the expert group come up with their recommendations, and it's absolutely horrendous what they're saying. So they want the definition of conversion therapy to be as wide as possible, as broad as possible. And this is what they say: the definition of conversion practices must be wide enough to encompass any effort to suppress a person's expression of sexual orientation or gender expression. And so in Edinburgh, we had this school which asked all of the boys to come to school wearing skirts. And you can imagine if your son comes home from school and says, Daddy, I want to wear a skirt to school tomorrow. And you say, no, it's not really what we believe as a family. We don't really go along with those kind of things. And so the next day, Timmy turns up to school, and the teacher says, Timmy, you've not got your skirt on. You seemed so excited yesterday. Why is that? Oh, my dad says that I can't wear one. That doesn't sound very good. I wonder if there's something that we could do about that. It's okay, Timmy. There's a tutu in the cupboard. You can wear that for today. We won't tell your dad about that, but I'm going to see if there's anything we can do to resolve this issue. And so what it says with conversion therapy, it says that aggravating factors, for sentencing of the criminalized acts, the group recommends 3 key aggravating factors be considered specifically. One of them is the performance of conversion practices on a child. So they are taking special aim against parents. The group believes that where the perpetrator has parental or guardianship rights in relation to the victim, the legal consequences ought to include the modification or the withdrawal of such rights. And so that would be taking away children from parents where the parents don't go along with transgender ideology. We see the Times reporting that there are thousands of families that went along with the kind of transgenderism ideology because of what the clinics were telling them, and they're now suing these clinics because these children now regret what had happened to them. Then it comes on to the subject of faith, and it says, the group recommends that where the perpetrators of any criminalized acts is a faith leader, a member of a religious institution, the legal consequences may include withdrawal of the perpetrator's professional license as a faith leader or removal of their ability to work in Scotland in said institution, or withdrawal of the institution's charity status where the institution is not regulated. And so for me as a Christian, Muslims it would be similar, Jews it would be similar, that we would see homosexual sex as something which is sinful and to be repented of. Something which, when somebody becomes a Christian, they should turn away from these things. And that's really what repentance means. It means turning away from what the Bible says is wrong. And there are, multiple people that have done that. In the Bible it says there were many of you who, were following these kind of ways, but you've now turned away from these practices. And it's exactly the same today. There's people speaking out, and so here's some people, it's called X Out Loud, and they're saying, change is my reality. That when I came to faith, something changed in my life. And so we have an incredible fight in front of us. And I believe that if parents understand the issues, I believe if pastors understand these issues, then they'll be ready to stand with us. And so it's really important that in the churches, it's really important that in the mosques, it's really important in the synagogues, it's important at the school gates that we are visible, standing up for what we believe in. In the time of the election, it's great that we get free flyers, free delivery of flyers. But one of the problems is there's 100 flyers that land on the doorstep with our flyers. In this season where we don't have an election on, there's nothing stopping us by in hand delivering our flyers to doors. And we should really be doing this as branches. In this season, we need copywriters, artists, poets, craft people, amateur actors, debaters, orators, camera people, photographers, investigative journalists, social media people, people who are part of parent-teacher associations, protest organizers, songwriters, letter writers, leafleters, school gate mums and dads, church influencers, bloggers, web developers. Whatever your gift or your skill is, we will have some way that we can use it as the Scottish Family Party. So the things I've talked about today are just things which are related to my skills, my gifts, my abilities, but you will have different skills. You will have different gifts and different abilities, and we really want you in your branches and individually to use your talents for the Scottish Family Party. Thank you very much for listening.
Thanks very much. I'm just going to check this clicker works. There we go. It's working. Good. Good morning. My name is Greg de Bliek, and I'm a member of the Scottish Family Party. And I'm glad to have this chance once again to address the conference. Last year I spoke a little bit about communication and truth, and this year my subject is persuasion. I heard an interesting interview with a guy from the CIA the other day, and his job was to go into foreign countries and persuade people to give him state secrets. And he said there were 4 levers that you can pull on to exploit people. And he used the acronym MICE, M-I-C-E, which stands for money, ideology, coercion, and ego. Now, I don't know about you, but that sounds a bit shady to me. So there are definitely dishonest and unscrupulous ways that we can manipulate people. But we are the SFP, we're not the CIA, and we want to be in the business of honest persuasion. Now, the SFP does have some really great ideas, solutions to many of Scotland's problems, and it's great that we're focusing on protecting children, protecting childhood. It's good to order your priorities and have a clear message. But there is a problem. We have these ideas and we want to persuade people to support them, to advocate for them. We want to see them shape the policies of the land. But the problem is, even when our ideas are good, people are difficult to persuade. They can be reluctant or indifferent. They can be confused sometimes, or they can be really entrenched in their ideas, or maybe they're just distracted by other things. And what we really desperately want to do is win them over, not to feel like we are the champions, but for their benefit and for our benefit and for the benefit of the country. So there are many challenges, and persuasion is a complex process. It happens at a personal level, the complex psychology of the individual. But you can also see persuasion at work at a societal level too. I wonder if you feel that there is a sea change moment coming in our culture, and wouldn't it be great if we could be a part of that? What I hope to do for the next few minutes then is just to open the watch and take a look at the mechanisms of persuasion, and also think about the things that get in the way of persuasion. Hopefully it will give us some useful tools and help us persuade people on these issues that we find so important. So Aristotle said that there are three principles of persuasion, and for some reason he said these in Greek. They are logos, pathos, and ethos, the three musketeers of persuasion. That loosely translates as facts, feelings, and ideals. So we're going to look at these in turn. So logos, first of all, is facts. A logos argument is an appeal to cold reason and logic. So a logos argument sounds like this. 1 in 5 kids in Scotland today has no father in their home. Or 3 out of 4 men in prison in England and Wales today had no father in their home. So those are facts, and they define the parameters of an issue, and they lead us towards a conclusion. And although we like to think that we are moved purely by facts, the truth is that facts are most helpful and most persuasive when they lead us where we already are inclined to go. If someone doesn't want to be led there, they will put the brakes on and put it into reverse and back out of there as fast as they can. And when we're talking about the idea of where we want to go, then we get into the realm of pathos. Now, pathos is an appeal to emotion. I've been watching a documentary this week on Elon Musk and SpaceX. Watching these huge rockets being launched, it reminds me of an interesting fact, and that is that a rocket uses 90% of its fuel just getting off the ground. And when it comes to being persuaded, logos arguments, they're like the rocket's guidance system once it's in the sky, but pathos is the fuel. It's the emotional explosion that moves us off the ground. So I'm going to play a clip next. Here's an example of pathos in action. It's a clip called Boot Camp, My Preteen. I'm hoping that this will play.
You're not an adult till you're 18. You want me to be your daddy for the next 8 years, son? Huh?
Yes, sir.
You do? Why do you want me to be your daddy?
I have no daddy.
You have no daddy? Well, let me tell you something. Come here, give me a hug.
So that's a powerful pathos argument. right there. It appeals to our empathy, doesn't it? And pathos arguments help us to empathize with how bad the problem feels and how good the solution feels. Now, Richard Lucas did a great video, a review of a book on empathy. I recommend that you check it out. My key takeaway from this was that policy making guided by empathy is quite dangerous. And one reason for that is that empathy itself isn't scalable. You can feel moved by the suffering of, say, one orphan, but the suffering of 100 orphans can't affect us 100 times as much. Nevertheless, we are human, and we're made to feel and be moved by things in the same way that rockets are made for the sky and not for the ground. So if there isn't an empathetic connection to the subject matter, the response will be, well, that's too bad, but there's lots of bad stuff happening in the world and we can't fix it all. So those are pathos arguments. Now, ethos is the last one. Ethos is a little bit more complex to explain. It deals with ideals and identity. It's quite an abstract idea. On the surface, you could say that an ethos argument is more about being won by the person rather than the content of the argument. But if we look deeper, we see that it's tied to our notions of identity and our principles, our ideals, what we think is right, the causes that we identify with, and what kind of person we want to be. So we all have a need of leaders. We want to trust someone who can guide us in decisions when we're unsure. If a person that we respect tells us something, there's already this foundation of trust that exists that has been built up and the credentials have been established somehow. Now, ethos arguments can stand on their own, apart from the person, but they're especially powerful when they're delivered by people who embody those ideals. So if you think about Martin Luther King and the I have a dream moments, or Churchill, this was their finest hour, these are powerful ethos arguments. Ethos ideas persuade us because they give us a glimpse of where we long to be. So it's good to try and be conscious of all three of these things as we persuade people. Logos, that's facts and figures. Pathos, emotions and empathy. Ethos, ideals and identity. Now, of course, people are still going to be hard to persuade. Nobody wants to be easily persuadable. Nobody wants to be known as gullible. And nobody likes to be told that they're wrong either. I'm sure you know the feeling. When you detect that somebody wants to change you, then the shields go up. It's like when you're approached by the term chugger, charity mugger in the street, these people who want a direct debit out of you for, save the snakes or whatever. People are highly wary of this, and we should try not to force people into a defensive stance early. Now, with important subjects, like so many of the subjects that the Scottish Family Party deal with, it's very difficult to discuss them without heat being generated, but it helps to pick your battles. And we've only got so much social capital, so we need to be conscious of that. We don't want to waste our social capital on fringe issues or, conspiracy theories. But as we come to round this off, here are a few quick-fire tips to consider as we think about this. So be winsome. If you're likeable, you use humour and you use it for them and not against them. You can share your story of persuasion. So help them to imagine taking a similar path and putting themselves in that same situation. If you can help them save face, you can make it easy and attractive for them to come over to your side. And be humble yourself and don't humiliate them. You can show the ugliness of an argument, but you don't have to call them ugly. You should value common ground as well. Show them by saying, I really love knowing that we can agree on this fundamental issue. And give them dignity as well, because the person that you are trying to persuade is not just a vote, they're not just a donation, they're not a demon to be exorcised, and they're not a caricature to be ridiculed. We believe that human beings have inherent dignity, and we stand in that principle in the Scottish Family Party. We believe it for human beings. Thanks. So we believe it for human beings in the womb, and we have to believe it applies to the people that we are trying to persuade, even when their positions are ridiculous or monstrous, subhuman positions that they take. We need to accord them with the dignity of a human being. Because we're all human beings, and we don't retain or prioritize information like we should. We get things wrong. We can be aimless and selfish. We can be distractible and slow to progress. A persuasive person can be that person who comes along and says, here are the facts, here are the dangers, here are the opportunities, here's why it's worth caring about, and here's what we can do next. And wouldn't it be great to be that kind of person? Now, finally, I want to encourage you to invest in persuasion. It's hard to be persuasive. It's hard to see when it's working as well. We shouldn't be discouraged when we don't see it happening right in front of our eyes, but we have to believe that a change is going to come. And if you're someone who's persuaded by the ideas of the Scottish Family Party, along with Phil, I want to encourage you, do something about it. You can give your money, you can give your time, skills, or resources so that we can continue working on persuading people together. And let's have the courage to persuade people ourselves. Learn the facts and handle them well. Share our ideals, establish our priorities, be passionate, and live by the principles that we espouse. If we do this, we will become more persuasive people. Others will join us, and we will make Scotland a better place for everyone. Thank you.
To hang on to my post by my fingernails. But no doubt we rely on the vigour and vim and enthusiasm of Richard, but he has, we've balanced the power and authority within the party. So we have deputy leaders, deputy chairmen, and I'm delighted to announce that we've appointed a number of branch chairmen who are going to reflect our devolvement of powers to branches to run constituency operations. So Hamish in the Borders, Karen in Ayrshire. So new chairs who you'll meet, Jonathan in East Kilbride, you'll meet them over at the session after lunch, and youthful chairs, and future competition for this post as chairman of the party. So I'm delighted to see that organizational structure start to be implemented. And I suppose our end point would be, we're not doing this for fun. We as conservatives, natural social conservatives, our temptation is not to get involved in the political struggle. That is, can be slightly beneath social conservatives, but in fact we can't flee to the hills. We have to fight this out, and there's a massive ideological battle going on, and we're one of the few participants fighting on the conservative ground for the family, and it's all in the name. The family is the institution that's under attack. The family they want to destroy, the family which is the main bulwark against the state, that is all of our enemies, the ideologues on the other side, on the woke side, want to destroy the beauty of the family and the independence of the family and the authority of parents and their desire to bring up their children in the way they wish to bring them up. So it's an important role, and our aim is to fight the Westminster elections and compete in all 57 seats, and that depends on our financial position, but in the past, through crowdfunding, through our benefactors, through our own local fundraising efforts, we're finding the resources to finance these campaigns, and they're so important in terms of attracting new members and competing in these elections. Because if we're not competing in elections, we're wasting our time. We may as well join pressure groups and advocacy groups, which I'm sure we also do that in our sort of spare time. but it's a political party that's seeking to win. And so after Westminster, we will be competing in the Holyrood elections, and by then, I think we'll have the awareness of the party, and we'll get our sort of cutting edge, and to actually win regional seats in the elections in 2024. Sorry, not 2024. It is, can anybody remind me? 26. So the elections in 2026 for the Holyrood elections. So the Westminster elections have to be called no later than January 2025. But who knows when it will be called? Spring 2024? Autumn 2024? Even earlier than that. I mean, who knows what's going to happen in terms of the Westminster political landscape? So all 57 constituencies for Westminster, and then by the following year, looking to get saving deposits and possibly getting seats on the regional lists. So that's the plan. And as you know, for 57 constituencies at Westminster, the deposits requires 28,000, but we get, and the cost of leaflets, but we get the free leaflet drops. We get the party election broadcast, all builds awareness, builds memberships, builds interest in the party, and may well lead to political power, because we want to get our ideas discussed in Holyrood. Now, for the vast majority of people, the family is the most important thing. Now, for parents and grandparents, children, grandchildren bring great joy. I mean, not all the time, but it is, for the vast majority, it is a great joy, and I think we become more fully human in our role as protectors of children and grandchildren. I mean, I think it brings innocence back to us as parents, as adults, to care for children and to have this sort of natural love for children as they grow up, and you know, under our guidance and protection. We don't need the state. We don't need the state to take over our role. This is something fundamental to us as human beings. And of course, we're well placed to defend the family. And if we do it coherently and we do it clearly, I think people will join us. But we know the attack on the family has been going on for centuries. I mean, even in the French Revolution, they sought to redefine the family, introduce divorce, and sought to drive a wedge between children and their parents. But we all know, we've seen the evidence, we've seen countless speakers stand on this podium and give us the evidence that the outcomes for children through the modern philosophy of giving them independence, sexualizing them at a very young age, the divorcing of parents, the restriction of families and smaller families or no children at all, has brought disastrous results on those families, on those individual children, and on individual nations. But our woke enemies they've won the debate. Now, they've cleverly framed the deconstruction of marriage and family as just an evolution of the institution, and that it's designed to embrace all types and to be more inclusive. And people are getting influenced by this. And we must directly criticize this. I mean, sometimes we're being too nice, but we must directly criticize this attempt to seize the family and make it more inclusive under these terrible values of equality, diversity, safety. We've got to fight back. Sebastian Morello wrote in the European Conservative, and I quote, "Parents can now abandon their children with few consequences. Homosexuals can rent wombs and buy babies from women in desperate poverty. Online grooming networks can talk children and vulnerable adults into having their genitals mutilated with the protection of the state. What we are witnessing is heartbreaking, and it all begins with the undermining and then the ideological colonization of the family. Any sound conservative activism must challenge this trajectory and seek to reverse the corruption of the family, whose destruction is the most sacred cause of the left." Sebastian Morello, and I can give you that reference. So if we cannot defend social institutions as basic as marriage and family and win votes for our endeavors, then we have a real problem. But I don't believe it's gone that far. But the arrest of pro-family, pro-life supporters in the USA by the FBI, who stormed into their homes, terrifying the children, the establishment of buffer zones, and the fear of arrest and imprisonment for 2 years for praying within a restricted area are symptomatic of what is to come. Sebastian Morello, he really points the finger at the LGBTQ movement, and he sees them as a sacred priesthood of the woke religion. That the woke crowd receive their doctrine, organize their sacred processions through the cities, adorn themselves with sacramentals, and are led under the flags of the LGBT, through the streets. And to fly a flag over every important building in Regent Street and Oxford Street, that is the symbol of an oppressor that has won. And we bend the knee to these flags. And every month there seems to be a public celebration of the LGBT movement and very little celebrating the family. But I know we have our flag, and I know Phil's going to be speaking about that later, and it's our flag that should be on every important building. It's the ancient institution of marriage which needs to be promoted. It needs to be promoted through the education system. And so we must express ourselves, we must lobby, we must compete politically and introduce our ideas into Holyrood and debate these fatuous arguments of the woke left, who see it as okay to chemically castrate and humiliate and mutilate children. We must not concede any more ideological or moral territory to this movement. And finally, we do what we can. We bring our resources, we bring our time, we bring our commitment. And this is the lovely thing about conference, is we get an opportunity to see the people behind this movement who are with us, who commit what they can. And I know it's very difficult if you're working. I managed to get away with it in the 1990s, running elections and holding down a job. But then there wasn't social media, there wasn't cancel culture. And I know it's very difficult for those of you who are working, who have families to support, and who need to earn a living. So, I do thank you for what you do offer. And those that give their name to go on the ballot paper, It might seem insignificant, but it's very, very important to us. So we need your continuing support in terms of names on ballot papers, the financial support, of course, and I'm sure Alan, when he comes up, will mention that. So please don't flag, keep going. So much depends on us, because it's only through the political struggle that we can change this once great nation. Thank you.